God's not through with you. Good evening, everyone. I stand before you today with a simple, yet powerful truth. God's not through with you. You might be facing circumstances right now that make it feel like everything is falling apart. You might feel like you've reached the end of the line, like there's no hope left, but let me tell you something, you are still here for a reason. There was a time in my life when I thought I would never make it. When I looked at the challenges before me, all I saw were obstacles too big to overcome. It's easy to let your limitations define you. It's easy to let your fears control you. But I want you to know right now, no matter what you're facing, God hasn't given up on you. Not for 1 second. God's purpose for you is unfinished. In the midst of your struggles, when the road feels impossibly long and the burden heavy, it's easy to forget this truth. We often look at our lives through the lens of the here and now, focusing on the pain, the setbacks, and the unanswered questions. We can be so fixated on what isn't working or the mistakes we've made that we overlook the fact that God's purpose is a journey that is ongoing and still unfolding. The chapters of our lives are still being written, and there is more to come. In the moments when everything seems broken or hopeless, remember that God does not work on our timeline. He sees the bigger picture. He knows the end from the beginning, and what seems like an obstacle to us may be part of a larger story, one that is not yet fully revealed. Think about the people in the Bible. So many of them faced immense hardships, challenges that would have made anyone feel as if their purpose was over. But time and time again, God showed up in those moments and revealed a greater plan. You are a work in progress, and God has not finished with you yet. You may not understand why things are happening the way they are, but trust that He is still at work in you, shaping you, refining you, and preparing you for what's ahead. Your current circumstances do not define your future. Even in your pain, God is still doing something in you that will ultimately serve a higher purpose. The story you're living is not a finished one. There are chapters yet to be written, and many of those chapters will involve moments of growth, healing, and breakthroughs that you cannot even begin to imagine right now. When we feel like we've hit a wall or reached the end, it's easy to become discouraged, to question our value, or to wonder if we're capable of moving forward. But God sees beyond our doubts, beyond our limitations. His plan for us isn't dictated by our weaknesses or our failures. Instead, it's built upon His infinite grace and love for us. What we might see as a dead end is often the beginning of something new, a new chapter in a much larger story. In those times when you feel like you're running on empty or standing still, remember that God's hand is still guiding you. He's still molding you, still preparing you for the work He has ahead. His purpose for you isn't limited by your past mistakes, your doubts, or the challenges you face. In fact, He often uses those very things to equip you for the future He has in store. Your journey is not over. It is still unfolding, and God's plan for you is far from finished. So keep going, because the purpose that God has for you is still unfolding. And the best is yet to come. Your struggles shape you. They don't define you. It's easy to fall into the trap of believing that the difficulties we face become the measure of who we are. We look at our failures, our mistakes, our setbacks, and we start to think that they are what make up the essence of our identity. But that's simply not true. Struggles may shape our experiences, but they do not define who we are at our core. The challenges we encounter can feel overwhelming, and in the moment they can cloud our vision of the future. It's hard to see beyond the pain when it's right in front of you. Yet, every single person has faced adversity in one form or another. What makes each person's journey unique is not the difficulty itself, but how they respond to it. Struggles don't have to break us. They don't have to leave us stuck or defeated. Instead, they can be the very things that refine us, build our character, and prepare us for what's next. It's in the struggle that resilience is born. It's in the hard moments that perseverance is forged. Without challenges, we would never truly understand the depths of our own strength or the power of hope. We wouldn't experience the kind of growth that comes from pushing through difficult times. Think about all the times you faced something you thought you couldn't get through, and yet here you are. Not only did you make it, but you've learned, you've grown, and you've become stronger. Your past struggles are a testament to your resilience, not your limitations. The key is understanding that while struggles shape you, they don't control your identity. The world may try to label you based on your mistakes or failures, but God sees beyond that. He sees the potential, the strength, and the purpose He has inside of you. What matters is how you choose to let your struggles affect you. Will you let them define your limits? Or will you let them push you toward your higher calling? Your worth isn't found in what you've been through, it's found in what God is still doing in you. Every difficulty you've faced has been an opportunity for growth. While you may have felt small or weak at times, each challenge has been a tool that God has used to mold and refine you. In the moment, it might feel like the end of the road, but looking back, you'll see how those moments were stepping stones to something greater. Struggles aren't meant to leave you broken or stuck. They're meant to build you up, even when you can't see it. What matters is that you don't let your struggles become your identity. They may have shaped your journey, but they are not the sum of who you are. Your identity is rooted in something far deeper: your relationship with God, the love He has for you, and the purpose He has set before you. The struggles you face are simply part of the process, not the final word on your life. The process isn't easy, but it is purposeful. Through every hardship, God is shaping you into the person He created you to be. The story isn't over yet, and what you become through it all is far greater than the struggle itself. Strength comes from trusting God in the hardest moments. When life is smooth, when everything seems to be falling into place, it's easy to say that we trust God. It's easy to believe that we're walking in His will when things are going well and the path ahead is clear. But the true test of trust doesn't come in the calm, it comes in the storm. It comes when the road gets rough, when we don't know what to do, and our circumstances seem to be more than we can handle. It's in those hardest moments that our trust in God is truly tested and strengthened. Trusting God when everything is going wrong is not easy. It's hard to keep faith when you don't understand why things are happening the way they are. It's hard to trust when your heart is heavy and your mind is filled with doubt. But it's in those moments of uncertainty and pain that God does some of His deepest work in us. Trusting God in the hard times doesn't mean that we have all the answers. It doesn't mean that we will immediately see the purpose behind our suffering. It means that despite the difficulty, we choose to believe that He is still in control, that He is still good, and that His plan for us is not thwarted by our struggles. When we trust God in the hardest moments, we begin to experience His presence in ways that we might never have encountered during the easy times. It's in the darkest valleys that His light shines the brightest. It's in the moments of weakness that His strength becomes more evident. God doesn't abandon us in our pain, rather, He draws nearer to us. He uses those times to reveal more of Himself to us, to show us that He is our refuge, our comfort, and our strength. In the moments when we feel weakest, that's when we find His strength most fully. When we trust Him, we allow Him to carry us through, even when we don't feel like we can make it on our own. But trust isn't just about believing that God will help us through the hard times. It's also about trusting His timing and His way of doing things. Sometimes God's plan doesn't align with our expectations. Sometimes His timing doesn't catch up with our timeline. We might think that we know the best way to solve our problems, but God sees the bigger picture. His ways are higher than our ways, and His understanding is beyond our understanding. Trusting Him means accepting that His plan is always better, even when we can't see the end result. The more we trust God in the hard moments, the stronger our faith becomes. Trust is like a muscle. The more we exercise it, the stronger it grows. Every time we choose to trust God, even when it's difficult, we are building a foundation that will support us through future challenges. And over time, we come to see that God is faithful. He has never failed us, and He will not fail us now. The harder the situation, the greater the opportunity to experience His strength and faithfulness in ways we never thought possible. Your worth is found in who you are in Christ. It's easy to look at ourselves through the lens of the world, through the standards set by society, the opinions of others, and even the judgments we make about ourselves based on our successes or failures. But if we measure our worth by these things, we will always come up short. The world's standards are constantly changing, and they never offer a foundation that is secure. But when we understand that our worth is rooted in who we are in Christ, we find a sense of value and security that transcends everything else. The world often tells us that our worth is tied to what we accomplish, how we look, or how much we have. We can easily get caught up in striving for these external markers of success, thinking that they will validate us and give us purpose. But when we base our worth on these fleeting things, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment because they are temporary. One day we may be praised for something we've done, but the next we might face failure or rejection. The highs and lows can feel like a never-ending roller coaster, and it can be exhausting trying to keep up with the world's expectations. When we understand that our worth comes from our identity in Christ, everything changes. We are not defined by what we do or don't do. We are defined by who God says we are. In Christ, we are chosen, loved, and valuable beyond measure. We are made in His image, and no accomplishment, no success or failure can take away our worth in His eyes. We are accepted not because of our achievements, but because of His grace. This is a truth that doesn't change no matter what we face. We are valuable not because of anything we've earned, but because of the love God has for us. It's easy to forget this truth, especially when we face criticism or when things don't go the way we expect. We might begin to question our worth, wondering if we're enough, but God has already declared that we are enough. He doesn't see us through the lens of our mistakes or shortcomings. He sees us through the lens of Christ's sacrifice, which makes us whole and complete in His eyes. This truth doesn't depend on our performance. It's rooted in the unconditional love that God has for us. The more we understand our worth in Christ, the more freedom we find. We no longer have to live under the pressure to prove ourselves to the world. We can rest in the knowledge that we are already loved, accepted, and valued by the Creator of the universe. This truth gives us the courage to live boldly, knowing that we don't need to seek validation from external sources. We are already validated by God. And as we live in this truth, we are free to walk in the purpose He has set for us. Not driven by the desire for approval, but by the desire to honor the one who created us. When we truly grasp this, it changes everything. Our worth is not dependent on our circumstances, our performance, or the opinions of others. Our worth is found in who we are in Christ, and that is something that no one can take away from us. Limitations are opportunities for God's power. It's easy to look at our weaknesses and limitations as barriers that stand in the way of our success or happiness. When we encounter obstacles, we often focus on what we can't do, what we lack, or how far we fall short. We compare ourselves to others and feel discouraged, believing that we are not equipped for the challenges we face. But in reality, our limitations are not something to be feared or avoided. They are the very places where God's power is made perfect. God doesn't expect us to be self-sufficient or to rely on our own strength to overcome life's difficulties. In fact, He often allows us to face limitations so that we can learn to depend on Him more fully. It's when we reach the end of ourselves, when we recognize that we can't do it alone, that we open the door for God's power to work in us. The Apostle Paul understood this concept deeply. In 2 Corinthians 12:9 he writes, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." This is a profound truth. Our weaknesses are not signs of failure, but opportunities for God to show His strength. When we face limitations, we have a choice. We can either focus on what we cannot do and allow our limitations to define us, or we can surrender them to God and watch as He works through them. The Bible is filled with stories of people who were limited in some way, but whose weaknesses became the place where God did extraordinary things. Moses, for example, felt inadequate to lead the Israelites out of Egypt because he was slow of speech. But God used his limitation to demonstrate His own power, speaking through Moses. and bring about a miraculous deliverance. Gideon felt unworthy and weak, but God used his small army to defeat the Midianites, showing that God's strength was made perfect in his weakness. Our limitations are not something to be ashamed of. They are a testimony of God's ability to work in us and through us. When we face challenges that seem too big for us to handle, we are invited to lean into God's grace and power. The truth is, it is through our limitations that God often does his greatest work. If we were perfect, self-sufficient, and without need, we might never experience the depth of his love and provision. But in our weakness, we are drawn closer to him, and his strength is revealed in ways that would never be possible otherwise. The key is shifting our perspective. Instead of seeing limitations as obstacles to our success, we can view them as opportunities for God's power to shine through. When we admit that we cannot do it on our own, we create space for God to show up and do what only he can do. The story of our lives is not about our ability to overcome every limitation on our own. It's about our willingness to surrender our weaknesses to God and trust that he will use them for his glory. In the process, we become more dependent on his strength, more aware of his presence, and more attuned to the ways he is working in and through us. Our limitations become the very place where God's power is revealed in its fullest form. The best chapters of your story are still ahead. It's easy to get stuck in the past, focusing on what you've already gone through, the failures, the regrets, the moments you wish had turned out differently. Sometimes we look at the present and feel like the best days are behind us. We start to believe that the future will be no different, that we are defined by what's happened to us or what we haven't yet accomplished. Life has a way of bringing us through seasons that feel long and difficult. We may face heartbreak, disappointment, or times when it feels like we're standing still, watching others move forward. It's tempting to think that where we are now is all there is, but God doesn't work in the present alone. He's constantly shaping us for the future he has prepared. Our present circumstances are not the final chapter. They are simply part of a much larger narrative. What we see right now is only one page in the unfolding story of our lives, and we have no idea what the next chapter holds. The good news is that God is not finished with us. He's always working, always moving us closer to the person he created us to be. Even in the moments when we feel stuck or when our progress feels slow, God is still at work writing the story he has for us. Think about the people in the Bible. Many of them faced trials that seemed endless, moments when they must have wondered if the best was behind them. But in the midst of their struggles, God was still preparing them for something greater. Joseph, for example, spent years in captivity and faced immense hardship, but those difficult years were part of the plan that ultimately led to him saving a nation. His best chapter didn't come until much later in his story. When we're walking through a season that feels hard, it's easy to forget that God is working behind the scenes. We might look at the present and wonder if we'll ever see change, if we'll ever experience the breakthrough we're hoping for. But God's timing is always perfect. What seems like a delay is often a divine preparation for something greater ahead. We may not understand why we're going through what we're going through, but we can trust that the best chapters of our story are still to come. The beauty of life is that God doesn't just use our successes to write the most important parts of our stories. He uses our struggles, our pain, and our failures to shape us. Each chapter, each season is part of a larger narrative that God is authoring. When we look back at our lives, we often see how the hardest moments became the catalyst for growth, resilience, and deeper faith. God's plan for us is not just about where we are today, it's about what he's preparing us for. The best chapters are the ones where we learn to trust him more, where we see his faithfulness in ways we never thought possible, and where we step into the fullness of the purpose he has set before us. So no matter where you are in your story, know this: the best is still ahead and God is not finished with you yet. Thanks for watching.